Alright guys, we've had 2003 Ronnie Coleman on the 2024 Mr. Olympia stage, we've had 2013 Phil Heath on the 2024 Mr. Olympia stage, and it seems that you guys wanna see this guy on the 2024 Mr. Olympia stage as well. 1993 Dorian Yates himself. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but we're talking about a 31-year gap between this physique of Dorian that literally kickstarted the mass monster era and today. We've had 60 Olympias, and the 1993 Olympia was the 29th edition, literally in the first half of Olympia's history if you split it in two. So with that said, will this physique of Dorian be able to match today's mass monsters? If you're asking the Dorianites, of course, the Dorianites see this more like this. For them, Dorian is bigger, drier, and everything possible rhyming with And I'm sure that the biggest Dorianite of them all will grace us with his presence in the comment section, the Lucian Popa himself. I'll make sure to pin your comment once it appears, big bro, all love. But the fact is that even though Dorian was the first true mass monster, that was a completely different era with completely different criteria, and Dorian's incredible dryness may be to the detriment of the fullness needed to succeed today. Just see Hadi's case from 2024. But anyway, enough of that rambling, let's get to the poses. Front double biceps, one of Dorian's weaker mandatories if we can say that. He himself admits he had 4 near invincible poses and 3 more underwhelming ones, 3 because he never counts the most muscular as it was never a mandatory during his reign. Your favorite most muscular was introduced as a mandatory pose at the 2004 Mr. Olympia, if you didn't know. Anyway, like I was saying, the front double is one of his weaker poses, obviously because of his arms. You see, back then arms mattered more because other than the arms, Dorian actually had a pretty nice flow, especially for a mass monster. And he also had very impressive forearms. We have to mention that here in 93 his waist was actually pretty small, and with his incredible lat development formed a rather impressive taper. His lower body, though not having the best quad sweeps, was impressive as well. He had some of the most detailed, deeply cut quads in history and the biggest calves of any Mr. Olympia. However, after saying all that, when we look in perspective, Dorian loses ground. These modern guys combine the modern era mass with the 80s vacuums, which leaves most guys in between these periods in a bad situation where they don't have the best look. I mean, you either have a vacuum or flexed abs. This relaxed ab stance that Dorian has here is the worst choice in my opinion. All in all, Dorian would separate himself with his dryness, being similar to what Hadi brings here, but he doesn't have the flow, and with all the risk of upsetting all you Dorianites, he is last here. But don't worry guys, because next is the front lat spread, the pose that Dorian Yates has on his name, and he's never ever selling back to anyone. He is the undisputed GOAT in the front lat spread. He is the standard. And we can see why. Literally, he has double-sized lats compared to anyone else in this pose. As simple as that. There are a few reasons behind this, and one of them is, of course, the fact that he arguably had the best lat development of any bodybuilder ever. He also had wide clavicles, which is always necessary in this pose. But the other factor which is less known by people is his arms. Having longer and skinnier arms is always better in this pose because your lats actually get more room for exposure. So yes, his lats may be the biggest, but he also has that window to display them. For example, a Phil or a Rolly could never display their lats to the fullest because of their thicker and shorter arms. Same could be said about Nick Walker. So yes, Dorian took last place in the front double, but takes first place in the front lat spread. But next we have another weaker pose for Dorian, the side chest. First of all, Dorian was holding this pose differently, more like the classic guys, but he didn't have the pectorals of the golden era, so basically he has the worst of both worlds. On top of everything, his shoulders were underwhelming, but at least, wink wink, they weren't sight enhanced. Now we don't have a full picture of Dorian hitting this pose in 1993, and honestly we don't even need it. I believe he takes last place again. But next we have the back double biceps, and we all know Dorian had one of the best backs ever, if not the very best, and yes, he destroyed everyone in his era when it came to this pose. However, not only have the physiques changed since then, but also how these guys are hitting the poses, besides the fact that he's not riding the horse here with his leg stance, which actually might be in Dorian's advantage. Some guys ride two fat horses nowadays, but I digress. But besides the leg stance, there's also the way he holds his back. I find it so frustrating that Dorian was not spreading his wide back in the back double biceps and opted for this more narrow hold. It really takes away from the wow factor, and against all these guys that are spanning and stretching their backs and leaning backward, he doesn't look all that impressive. He doesn't look number one in this pose. Again, if this was 4K HD, he would have made the difference in details, hardness and separation. But as for the shape and overall flow, Dorian might find himself even in last place here. We have to give him the calves here because he wins that big time. But as for the pose overall, where do you have Dorian in this lineup? Next is the back lat spread, and despite the fact that he's slightly turned to the side, which takes away from the width, he still looks the widest here. This is what happens when Dorian Yates spreads his wings. His X-frame just looks incredible, having that wide structure, wide lats and huge calves. He looks great top to bottom, and he would look even greater if the picture quality reflected the reality of his dryness, so all in all, I believe Dorian would win this pose against today's lineup. Next is the side triceps, and this is a pose between Dorian and Samson. If you ever wondered why I mention Samson's pose as Dorian-esque in every video, it's because of this. This is the variation of the side triceps Dorian made famous, and not anybody could pull this off. You need to have the calves, and truly now we can see how impressive his calves were. They look double the size of Samson's, and Samson is a big fella with more than decent calves. Now this pose isn't all about the calves but about the triceps too, and even though Dorian's lateral head was impressive, Samson's is double the size of that. Now surprisingly, Dorian's chest looks better than Samson's here. If only he could showcase his chest the same way in the side chest. Overall, it's close between his and Samson here, but I still think that Dorian's looks more impressive. Dorian has an aura when hitting this pose. In the abs and thighs, Dorian doesn't convince me. Besides the fact that his quads are almost smaller than Derek's, his abs are definitely the worst in this lineup. He's got the worst ab definition, even worse than Derek and Samson, but this might be because of the photo quality as well. I'm not gonna hide around the fact that I see Dorian Yates taking yet another last place, so with him in this comparison, it's either first place or last place, which makes it incredibly difficult to have a verdict. Let's see the most muscular, which clearly won't help Dorian's case. Now I know it wasn't a mandatory back then, but this video is called Dorian Yates on the 2024 Mr. Olympia stage, not the 2024 Olympia lineup in the 90s. So I don't want to hear about that, Lucian. It doesn't matter the variation, Dorian takes yet another last place in this comparison. Just as in the side chest pose, he doesn't have the arms and shoulders nor the chest to be competitive in this pose. So in the end, this is a very tough call to make, but my conclusion is that if Dorian Yates had a time machine when he was on that stage in 1993 and traveled to the 2024 Mr. Olympia in the first call-out, he would have a hard time. He would be the most conditioned, but as we've seen with Hadi, it's much more than just that. Now, of course, Dorian had a bigger and better structure than Hadi, but didn't have Hadi's full muscles, or especially Samson's or Martin's or Derek's for that matter. Dorian would dominate certain aspects like the back, the calves and the execution of most poses, but he would get exposed on other aspects big time. Now don't get me wrong, this was the standard back then. I would even say more than the standard, so of course if Dorian was competing nowadays, I'm sure he would have just as successful a reign as he had back then, but in this video we're comparing his 90s physique as he looked back then. And one more thing, it's probable that if we take in isolation Samson, Hadi, Derek and Martin and compare them one-on-one with Dorian, Dorian could come on top in every comparison. But when you have multiple guys on a stage, you can clearly see the trends, you can see the anomalies, and Dorian would be an anomaly on today's stage as he looked back then. He would dominate certain things, but he would give up others. And wrapped up together, I'm not positive Dorian would win the Olympia in 2024 with this physique. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on this. Lucian Popa, I hope I see you there too. Like this video if you're not a Dorianite. The Dorianites will certainly dislike. Subscribe if you're not a Dorianite, and if you are, subscribe so you won't miss my other dislikable videos I do in the future. See you next time.